A winter-themed diorama can help set the mood for the festive season. Join me in this video as I explore a low-cost and relatively easy way of bringing a bit of seasonal atmosphere to your scale models. Hello and welcome to Model Minutes. In this, my Christmas special video for 2018, I explore an easy way of building a low-cost winter-themed diorama, which can be used as a seasonal display piece or simply as a base for trying new techniques. Before I start the video, please remember that adult supervision may be required at times, due to the use of sharp tools and toxic paints and chemicals. The first thing I did when I came up with the idea for my Christmas special was to find some suitable buildings. I thought about taking some model railway buildings and using them, but at about £5 per kit, I thought that might be out of my price range for this small diorama. As a result, I discovered the website christmasvillagedisplays.com, which has some great resources for building a seasonal display. I'll add the link to the site under the video. The buildings I chose to construct were all available for free from that website and were downloaded to my computer and then resized roughly to N-gauge model scale, which is 1 to 148 scale in the UK. I say roughly rescaled as they didn't seem to have a scale listed, so I didn't know what ratio to reduce them by. As a result, I viewed the files at 100% on my computer and then reduced the size until the doorways would more or less fit an N-gauge person. The reason I chose this scale was to get the most diorama in the smallest of spaces. That, and I already had some accessories left over from a previous model railway which I could reuse. The buildings were then printed onto A4 card. They were cut from the card using both knives and scissors, with a steel ruler helping to ensure a straight line when needed. All of the folds in the buildings were scored lightly with a knife prior to being folded. Having cut the buildings out, they were then glued together using a general purpose craft glue. This glue has a habit of being a bit stringy, so care has to be taken to make sure it doesn't get in the wrong places and ruin the finish. The buildings are reasonably well detailed, with little quirks like snowmen, Christmas trees and even Father Christmas being present on them. They are somewhat simple, however, being rather two-dimensional and lacking the quality of other printable buildings. This being said, they make a good introduction to this style of model if you've never tried building them before, so for this reason I'd recommend them. The buildings could be improved too by running a felt tip down the folds and joins to make them less obvious, and adding other details like drain pipes, moss and weathering on the roofs, but I chose to use them as they were. Next, I reused some cardboard packaging, cutting it into a rectangle of no particular size, but looks to be about 6 inches by 4 inches or so. The assembled buildings were then laid out on the base in various patterns, until I came up with a layout I was happy with. I'd found a free image of a snowy background online, and this was printed at full quality on a piece of A4 card. It was then cut to a reasonable size, again with the aid of a ruler to ensure a good straight edge. This back seam was then glued to another piece of thicker cardboard with the same general purpose glue, and the excess was cut away. I forced the back seam into a gentle curve and positioned it on the display base. Using a pen, I marked the curve, then cut the base to the shape of the curve. I then glued the back seam to the base along the curved edge that I'd just cut. Next, I took another piece of thicker card and again marked the base using a pen. This edge was then cut off and this new curved piece laid on top of the base. I laid out the buildings in the desired layout on this card and marked out where the roads would be using a marker pen. The roads were then cut out and discarded. I kept the other parts as they were to represent the pavements, and these were glued onto the base. I felt that this gave a good contrast between the raised pavements and the lower areas of the road in the given scale. Next, I used Humbrol 64 acrylic matte light grey paint, which I thinned with a little water to improve its flow and coverage. This paint was applied to the entire base area, right up to the back scene. I tried to be as neat and careful as possible so that it didn't spoil the image on the back scene. When the paint had dried, I glued the buildings back onto the base using the same general purpose glue from before. I had some Woodland Scenics tree armatures from a previous project and decided to add these to the diorama. I opted for the smaller ones as they would be quite appropriate to the small scale. No foliage was added as I chose to depict a tree which had lost its leaves. A small hole was made in the base, glue was added, and the tree pushed into place. Some bushes were also added in various places. I used Woodland Scenics clump foliage for these. I added a stretch of N-gauge hedgerow, which I had in my spares box. It was cut to length and glued in various places to help give a bit more detail, particularly between the church and the rows of houses, to depict the separation of gardens. Other details, including telephone poles and cars, were also added. Again, these were from my spares box. The telephone poles were added the same way as the trees, by making small holes and gluing them in. The cars, however, were just glued straight onto the roads. Next, it was time for the snow. I'm using the Noch Powdery snow, which I bought online for about £10. For this diorama, I'll only need a small amount, however, and will have loads left over for other projects. The instructions of this don't call for any glue to be used, as it's suggested that it could be used as a temporary effect that could be added to model railways and dioramas as a seasonal addition and then cleaned up or vacuumed away if needed. I poured some of the snow powder into a tea strainer and then gently sprinkled it over the diorama. I tried to ensure an even coating of snow all over the model to give a nice uniform effect. The roofs of the buildings are rather smooth, and I wish I'd added a little glue onto them, as the majority of the powder simply cascaded off of the roofs. Although in real life it is normal to see a building with no snow on the roof, as it may have all melted or slid off due to poor insulation inside the house, in more modern properties or in heavier snowfall, the snow would be stuck to the roof. Nonetheless, I felt it wasn't too much of an issue and carried on with the build. A few N-gauge people were then added to the model, again by gluing them on. I did find that I had to remove some of the snow powder and glue them onto the base, as the snow powder did not create a good surface for them to be stuck to. In hindsight, I should have added the people before the snow to ensure a good bond, and then removed the snow powder on the people with a fine paintbrush. With all the details added, I then started manipulating the snow a little to make it look disturbed by the inhabitants of the village. Some powder was gently pushed to the sides along one of the pavements and away from some of the doors of the houses to make it look as though the snow had been cleared. The powder forms quite realistic banks on either side when this is done. I also repeated this process for the tracks left by one of the cars, remembering to remove the snow from the windscreens, but left it on the roof and bonnet, as is so commonly done in the UK. Of course, if you are going to drive in the snow, all snow should be removed from the roof of the car to prevent accidents, but the person in this village has been quite careless. Fortunately, it appears that they've not gone very far due to the adverse conditions. And that's as far as I went with my seasonal winter village diorama. I'm pretty happy with the finished model, and it was reasonably cheap to construct using recycled, free and low-cost materials. The most time-consuming part of this build was the construction of the houses, but after a few goes I was able to build a house every 5 minutes. From start to finish, it probably took about 3 hours of construction time in total, not including drying times or waiting for the snow powder to arrive in the post. There are lots of little details or improvements that could be made to this, most of which I mentioned as I was building the diorama. But I'm quite pleased with how it looks, particularly the realistic piles of snow from the clear path and the way it shows the difference in level between the pavement and road. I feel that this is quite a good seasonal display and is well within the reach of those with even a tiny amount of modelling experience. All that's left to say is Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to everyone who's watched and subscribed in the last 12 months. Thanks for watching this video, and don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed it. As always, let me know what you think of this build, or if you've got any suggestions for future kits or dioramas by leaving a comment. Subscribe and click that notification button in order to see more content and help support the channel. And feel free to share this video with your family and friends. Don't forget that you can connect with me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. See you all again next time.